I want you to think about the last movie you saw. Okay, now think about the way it made you feel. Did it make you laugh or cry? Did it make you anxious or angry? Regardless of how that film made you feel, I think we're all pretty familiar with the ability of films to manipulate our emotions. But what you might not realize is the ability of films to manipulate the way we perceive audio-visual content. My name is Grant Breiter. I'm a film major, a psychology major, and a neuroscience and chemistry double minor. As you can probably surmise by my messy combination of degrees, I am interested in the intersection between film studies and cognition. Currently, I'm working on experimental research that uses brain imaging and eye tracking technology to try to understand how people process films. But in general, the research I conduct involves analyzing films and then applying psychological principles to understand how they function. And what I have found is that films represent something very unusual, psychologically speaking. While most of us find film viewing to be an effortless, almost mindless experience, film viewing is, in fact, an extremely unnatural cognitive process. Take a look at this video. I'm guessing what you saw was a woman walking through a door and then teleporting to the middle of a yard. Now, we certainly don't see anything like this in our day-to-day experience, so why would we perceive the events in this video in this manner? These days, we see a lot of big-budget, blockbuster movies that are completely drenched in CGI. And in these types of films, it's not unusual for us to see images of people magically teleporting to new locations. But in this video clip, there's no CGI. We also don't have some sort of fantastical narrative to motivate this perception. We simply have two juxtaposed images. And in spite of being two unique, distinct images, our mind unites them together into a seamless narrative. What's going on here? The answer lies within a phenomenon that pervades popular narrative films. You know, the sort of stuff you typically see when you go to the local movie theater. See, there's a common thread that unites these types of films. Whether it's Avatar, or The Notebook, or Finding Nemo, they're all constructed in an almost identical manner. That is to say, the individual shots of these films are all stitched together according to the exact same set of principles, the same set of agreed-upon rules that dictate the assembly of movies. It's part of a practice known as continuity editing. Continuity editing encompasses a variety of film editing techniques that are designed to help the viewer maintain a coherent sense of space and time within a film's narrative. One example of a continuity technique is called the match on action. This is a technique in which a movement is begun in one shot and then completed in the next. Here's an example. We see one continuous motion, but note how the pie begins moving forward in one shot and then collides with its target in the next shot. They're disjointed images, person winding up with pie, then close-up of pie and face. Yet we accept that the disembodied hand in this second shot belongs to the person winding up with the pie in the previous shot, though logically it can't be proven. I mean, they're completely separate images. But see, that's the power of continuity editing. It allows our mind to unite distinct images into a seamless narrative. In this case, someone shoving a pie into my face. Our mind processes this type of edit so intuitively that even when there's a strange anomaly, our mind still processes films in accordance with our expectations about this technique. That's part of why we think we're watching this woman transport to a new location. Our mind is accustomed to the use of continuity editing to delineate a narrative. And thus, it expects the sequence of images to present us with a logical progression of character and of story because of the continuation of motion from shot to shot. So even though the cut jumps from one location to another, our mind still presents us with a coherent narrative. Now, if I showed you an image of the woman walking through the door and then a shot of her just kind of standing in the yard, you'd probably be more likely to see these two shots for what they are, distinct, separate images. But the continuation of motion engages our expectations in narrative, thus causing our minds to produce a narrative, anomalous though it may be, that unites the two shots. The end result is teleportation. Now, it's important to understand that continuity editing is not the only type of film editing out there. In avant-garde cinema, and in many of the famous films that came out of the Soviet Union, different styles of film editing are employed to express stories. These include cutting in a rhythmic pattern or throwing images together into a chaotic montage. Continuity editing is simply what we encounter most frequently. It's employed overwhelmingly, not just in the movies we watch, but also in the television shows we watch too. It's ingrained in our visual culture. And just like any other part of our culture, whether it's the food we eat or the clothes we wear, there's nothing natural about it. It's something that we've been conditioned to. And most of us have been undergoing this conditioning our entire lives. So, what would it be like to watch a continuity-style movie for the first time as an adult? Well, two scientists decided that they are going to find out. In 2010 and again in 2015, scientists Stephen Schwann and Sarman Ildarar hiked out to a remote region in southern Turkey where they found adults who had never seen a movie before in their life. They then showed these adults various video clips that demonstrated certain continuity editing techniques. They also showed these same clips to another group of adults of a similar distribution of age, gender, education level, and cultural and geographic background who had been watching film clips for 10 to 20 years. When they compared these two groups' interpretations of the video clips, they found very different interpretations of what was going on. One example of a video clip that they showed looked something like this, where we see the exterior of some building followed by a shot in some interior space. Now, this is an editing technique known as the establishing shot, otherwise known as the beginning to every scene in every sitcom ever. And this is by design. You see, the establishing shot is typically used at the beginning of a new scene to cue the viewer to the fact that the story has shifted to a new location. As such, it is typically assumed that the action going on in the second shot is whatever is occurring in the building depicted in the previous shot. Indeed, this is how experienced film viewers in the study interpreted this type of edit. However, inexperienced film viewers came to a completely different understanding of what was going on. So, when experienced film viewers saw this type of clip, here's what they said. I saw a house and a person sitting in it. But when inexperienced viewers saw it, they responded, okay, there's a house, there's someone sitting in a room. They see these two shots as being unrelated. So when asked which house the person was sitting in, inexperienced film viewers would say, well, I don't see a house. Or if they were a little sassy, they might say, well, I don't know her personally, so how do I know what her house looks like? It seems as though film experience is affecting how these clips are being interpreted. It seems as though inexperienced film viewers aren't making the same assumptions or conclusions that experienced film viewers are. In this study, they used another video clip that looks something like this. This is another continuity editing pattern called the shot reverse shot. You typically see this sequence when two people are having a conversation in a film. Experienced viewers typically interpreted these final two shots of the film as alternating camera angles between two people as they continued to sit and stare at each other. However, once again, inexperienced film viewers had a completely different understanding of what was going on. When the video cut to shot 3 here, inexperienced viewers thought that the person in shot 2 walked away or disappeared. They also thought that in these final 2 shots, rather than perceiving alternating camera angles, they sensed that the individuals were turning towards the camera. Inexperienced film viewers were coming to completely different conclusions about the spatial relationships and even the behaviors of the characters in the scene. So this provides further evidence that our experience with continuity editing is affecting the way we perceive continuity editing. And this makes sense in light of other research that suggests our experiences with media affect the way we perceive stories. In 1920, there was a British psychologist named Frederick Bartlett who wanted to see what would happen when he had British subjects read a story from a culture unlike their own. So he had his British test subjects read an old Native American legend, specifically an old Chinook tale, that incorporated concepts and a narrative structure that were unfamiliar to a British audience. What he found was that the story details the British subjects remembered accurately were those that correlated most closely with their previous experiences with storytelling, that is, the stories of a British literary milieu. Story details that were unfamiliar to them were adjusted or omitted so their recollection of the story fit narrative conventions established by their British culture. Their experiences with media, as established by their culture, exerted some sort of influence on their understanding of the story. What this study indicates is that the mind is not passively taking in information. It's actively manipulating it. In that sense, your brain is kind of like a little kid with a Play-Doh set. Because just like how a little kid will stuff the Play-Doh into various molds that come with the set, our brain stuffs the Play-Doh of reality into certain molds as well. Except these molds can't be purchased at the toy store for $19.99. These are molds that are produced by our experiences. So when the media continually feeds us the same editing techniques again and again, those editing techniques become another mold in our existential Play-Doh set. And this is how continuity editing ends up influencing the reality we perceive on screen. Sometimes this can be used to trick us. Take a look at this clip. Chances are you saw a bunch of different clones of the same guy looking at each other. Of course, these were just individual shots of the same person taken one after the other that were then aligned in such a manner that our mind sutures them all together into one coherent story. In this case, we again have our familiarity with a continuity editing technique being taken advantage of. This one is called the eyeline match. An eyeline match occurs when we have a shot of a person looking in a certain direction, followed by another shot of a different person or an object. Now, it's typically assumed that the object or person in that second shot is whatever the person in the first shot is looking at. What you see here is a prototypical example of the eyeline match. But it's pretty much the same sequence of images that we saw repeated again and again in the video that we just watched. Except instead of looking at another person or object, this guy is being set up so that it appears as though he's looking at himself. In the Schwann and Ilderar study, a more simplistic example of the eyeline match was used, kind of like the one you see here. But even then, they were still finding intriguing differences between the interpretations that the two group studies were having, that is, the inexperienced versus the experienced viewers. Experienced viewers pretty much always interpreted this clip the way we interpret it. Whatever that thing in the second shot is, that's what's being observed by the person in the first shot. Now, inexperienced viewers often saw this same relationship, but there are some times where they didn't, instead seeing no relationship between the two shots. So it indeed appears as though our experience with continuity editing is causing us to make certain assumptions about the way films are structured and the way they're meant to be interpreted. Repeatedly seeing the same continuity editing techniques are causing us to interpret movies in the same standardized way, even when they don't totally fit the continuity formula. What this suggests is that our perceptions are being crafted by the media we're exposed to. Now, I think we understand how this is true in terms of the way the media influences our ideas, from which issues are important to what we know about those issues. But what our conditioning to continuity editing suggests is something far more subtle than that. What this suggests is that the media influences not just our ideas about information, it also influences the very mechanics by which we take in and process that information. The media hardwires us to perceive the world in a certain way. So if this is the effect that movies can have on us, what effect do other forms of media have on our cognitive processes, like the internet and virtual reality technologies? And is this impact just enough to create some neat optical illusions? Or can it indirectly influence the way we develop our worldviews? Now, I can't speak for these other forms of media, but I can say that continuity-style film is fundamentally influencing our perceptual processes. So, the next time you go to the theater for what you think is just a mindless diversion, remember, that movie you're watching can influence the way you think. Thank you.